What would I do if my country was committing genocide? The answer is you're doing it right now. Big anarchist symbol.
It's like, it is actually a profound thing to say. I mean, your biggest fear is if you martyr yourself off, is that your message would be taken lightly. And I don't think his message was taken lightly at all. So we're going to Ben Shapiro land. And if you've never been here, I'm sorry. I really am. Ben Shapiro is what can only be described as somebody who talks quickly and uses that to bamboozle you. Now, we all know that a U.S. serviceman set himself on fire to protest the genocide in Gaza, and Ben Shapiro had some takes. So we're going to go over to Ben, and we're going to let him cook a little bit, and then we're going to roast him relentlessly.
So, on Sunday, an active duty Air Force member set himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. to protest the war in Gaza. And this, of course, has unlocked all of the worst hordes of the internet who have decided that apparently this member of the Air Force, who is a disturbed anarchist, was some sort of hero. And that has some really bad implications for politics and for morality and for virtue. So,
wow. My boy Ben's starting off really strong here. Basically, protesting as an anarchist, if you have a mental health issue, is disturbing for morality and virtue. Now, granted, he's talking more about the idea that people are recognizing this protest as something that was valuable. But make no mistake, the framing here is that this is bad, and I'm going to tell you why. And that's just how Ben works.
let's start with the simple facts in this particular case. The person's name was Aaron Bushnell. Aaron Bushnell was 25 years old, and he was, in fact, a disturbed anarchist. How do we know that he was an anarchist? Well, because he said so. So, first of all, this should raise some serious questions about how we actually screen for the American military.
Well, he was an admitted anarchist, right? I'm curious, though. Is Ben about to gloss over the disturbed label? I'm sure he'll elaborate.
And the simple fact of the matter is that the standards for the American military have been dropping pretty radically. This guy was an IT specialist, and he'd been in the military for several years. And he was, in fact, an active anarchist. Now, you know that the military has been targeting so-called white supremacy in the military. If you're a conservative in the military and you're open about it, that may call into question your loyalty to the U.S. military. But apparently, you can be a radical anarchist publicly, and that has no implications whatsoever for your military service.
Okay, now let's just be clear here. He has completely dropped the word disturbed now. He's qualified anarchist, which was true. And that's a legitimate conversation to have with yourself and with others and people that want to argue in good faith. Should we have a variety of ideologies like anarchism, socialists in the military, right? I think it's a dumb conversation to have personally, but I'm a little biased. But make no mistake, he's dropped the word disturbed. He's applying to Aaron retroactively because he killed himself. He's an anarchist. He was a serviceman. But to call him disturbed is simply to denigrate his sacrifice.
Apparently, you can also be a disturbed person because it turns out you have to be kind of disturbed to set yourself literally on fire in front of the Israeli embassy to protest a non-existent genocide.
And there it is. So the reason he's disturbed is because of what he did. He wasn't disturbed going into it. He's disturbed because of his actions in retrospect. Now, obviously, on your screen right now, you see Ben denying the genocide in Palestine, which, if you're familiar with Ben at all, you understand this is par for course. We're not actually going to be discussing this today. It's mostly about the actions of Aaron and how Ben interprets them. So make no mistake, there is a genocide in Gaza. It's multiple pronged. It's not up for debate among those arguing in good faith. It's simply a matter of why and how. That's it.
Which is what this person did. So, according to the Washington Post, quote, less than 2 weeks before Aaron Bushnell walked toward the gates of the Israeli embassy on Sunday, he and a friend talked by phone about their shared identities as anarchists and what kinds of risks and sacrifices were needed to be effective. Bushnell mentioned nothing violent or self-sacrificial. Then on Sunday, Bushnell texted that friend who described the exchange on the condition of anonymity to protect his safety. Quote, "I hope you'll understand. I love you. This doesn't even make sense, but I feel like I'm going to miss you." And then he sent a friend a copy of his will on Sunday in which he gave his cat to his neighbor and a fridge full of root beers to his friend. And then 12 minutes later, he doused himself with liquid and set himself on fire while shouting, "Free Palestine."
Fucking king stuff right there. King stuff. Make sure he made sure the cat's okay. He gave away some root beer. He told his buddies he'd miss them. He stood up for the most oppressed people, right? King stuff.
He died 7 hours later at a hospital. Now, what's amazing about...
Oh, I didn't know that. He died 7 hours later. Oh, man. Oh, that was probably agonizing. They probably had him on morphine, though, quickly.
About all of this. And we know his past. We know that he was raised, apparently, on a cult religious compound. We know that he fell out.
Ben, do you want to talk about people that were raised on cult religious compounds and how they've turned out and their impact on America? Do you want to run those numbers, Ben? Would you be interested in talking to me a little bit about, obviously I'm talking to my screen, but would you be interested, Ben, in talking to me about the ramifications of isolating people and pumping them full of religious indoctrination and what that does to the fabric of Western society? Would you be interested in that conversation, Ben?
Of that cult, apparently. And then he immediately went into the military and started associating with radical groups, radical anarchist groups.
I would love to hear Ben Shapiro describe an anarchist group that isn't radical. I'd like for him to describe like a group that's like, yeah, there's a couple of anarchists over here. They're not radical, but they're just moderate anarchists. I'd love to hear him say that. This is really how Ben works. And I'm virtually immune to this stuff because I've consumed, this type of content for so long from the other side. But it's slick. He's slick with it. There's no such thing as a non-radical anarchist in this man's eyes, right? And just like there's no such thing as somebody who can set themselves on fire that's not disturbed, right? He's packaging these thoughts for you.
According, again, to the Washington Post, Lupe Barboza, 32, said she met Bushnell in San Antonio in 2022 at an event for a socialist organization. She said they bonded over their politics and started working together to deliver clothing and food to people experiencing homelessness. He was outraged. He knew no one who was in charge is listening to the protesters out there every week, Barboza.
Dude, this is like empathetic stuff. Helping homeless, outraged that nobody's taking action.
Said he knows that he has a privilege as a white man and a member of the military. And in fact, in the public statement that he released to the media before committing suicide by burning himself to death, this person included, for example, his pronouns in his suicide note. The final post of Aaron Bushnell said, quote, "Many of us like to ask ourselves, what would I do if I was alive during slavery or the Jim Crow South or apartheid? What would I do if my country was committing genocide? The answer is you're doing it right now." Big anarchist symbol. And so this
it's like it is actually a profound thing to say. I mean, your biggest fear is if you martyr yourself off, is that your message would be taken lightly, and I don't think his message was taken lightly at all.
person is a far leftist, and not just a far leftist, but a disturbed far leftist, because there are lots of people who are far left who do not set themselves on fire, actually. And when he says in his suicide note, in his final note, that he was, quote unquote, complicit in genocide, the question would be exactly how, considering.
Well, Ben, I know you're about to mitigate it, but he's complicit in it because he's an active service member in the U.S. Army, which is all but chaperoning a genocide right now. That is unequivocally complicity in the genocide. There's no way out of it.
The United States Air Force is not even involved in the war in the Gaza Strip. Not only that, there is not a genocide in the Gaza Strip. I know that it has become
Well, there is a genocide, and we are involved, right? We're sending them weapons, money. They have training, expertise, technology. We are our carriers are nearby. We're going up and down all sides of the entire region.
Commonplace for morons in the media to suggest that a targeted operation by the Israelis in the Gaza Strip that has killed, according to the Israelis, upward of 10,000 members of Hamas who are hiding among civilians.
Yeah, so here's the deal. We already know the body count at this point. We already understand the ratio of civilians to Hamas. It's a genocide. It's a Horrible, horrible genocide. This is all
that is
propaganda.
Somehow an example of a genocide, but I can assure you that is definitionally wrong. Israel has complete air superiority.
Well, Ben assures us, so it must be real. Again, we're not going to necessarily get into all this. I want to make it very clear that like this is a really hard thing for Ben to do. He essentially has to take a young man who is full of empathy, full of love, full of life, who sacrificed everything, all of the treats, all of the conditioning, all of the joys of Western imperialism. He sacrificed it all, martyred himself for a bunch of people he's never met. Ben has to take this and call him disturbed and radical and gross and disgusting. This is a hard job for Ben because we are all people at the end of the day, and some of us are better at deluding ourselves than others, but nobody wants to wake up as a champion of what can only really be described as fascism and see a young soul who did everything right wake up from the spell of liberalism and essentially understand that this is all for naught if there are people dying at our hands or are in activity. And for that young man to give it all up and to send a message out there, this is nightmare fuel for reactionaries. This sucks so bad for them. And for Aaron, of course, we appreciate you, and your message is loud and clear. And I can only imagine that should news of an active U.S. service member self-immolating reach the people in Gaza, that they understand that this message, that they're trying to send is slowly permeating the imperial core. So, Ben, I'll send you off with a hearty fuck you. There is a genocide in Palestine. It is the IDF that is responsible. America is complicit. This young man was not disturbed. He knew what he was doing. He made a calculated effort. And it's really not so easy to shut someone like you down. I only fantasize that one day I'll be able to do it to your face, champ.